We have more post-debate polls rolling in. According to the latest one from the Washington Post and ABC News, more than half of Democratic voters, 56%, say that Joe Biden should drop out of the race. Joining us now, former Deputy Assistant Secretary of State and former spokesman for Hillary Clinton, Philippe Reines, and former Democratic congressman who's represented New York's 11th District, Max Rose. I told you guys I'd have you back on to talk about this, and look, here you are. Max, I'm going to begin with you. The lawmakers that we're seeing today, we saw a House member, we saw a senator, sure. We're seeing a candidate in a close district in Iowa. What's your sense of how things are moving?
It's very weird because it seems that there's two contradictory sentiments in the Democratic caucus right now. One is, and this is what Senator Peter Welch said, I can't unsee the debate. No going back, it's all over. If anyone feels that way in the caucus, well, just rip the Band-Aid off. Like, this drip campaign is just, quite frankly, emotionally disturbing for everybody else. Like, let's just get it over with.
Keeps it all in the headlines for so much longer.
It's not good for anybody. On the other side, though, there's a healthy number of people, I would suspect it's actually the majority, who are saying, well, look, I don't like how it went, but I want to see him do better. If that's the case, look, the president had a pretty good week, right? It's not perfect, but he didn't have a week of a series of flubs. He spoke, without a teleprompter at the union event just the other day. But if someone's thinking about the data, right? They keep on pointing to the polling. Of course, the president's numbers went down. But the question is will it be temporary? I suspect that that's actually the case, that you're going to see a massive swing back. But polls are lagging indicators, so it would take some time. So there has to be a concerted strategy here, and that means that they have to reconcile those two separate camps here that are just at total loggerheads.
I have a question, though. If Joe Biden stays in the race and say he loses, what does that do to the Democratic Party?
I think, God forbid, if Donald Trump becomes the president yet again, what people are, first of all, everyone's going to be scared out of their minds, right? And what people are going to be looking at and focusing at is rebuilding the party, winning the presidency back.
You don't think it tears the party apart?
No. And I don't even think that we should think about this from, I can't count the number of times that people are saying I don't entertain hypotheticals at this point, right? I'm sure you love it when they say that.
Yes, they're hypotheticals, but they are all within the realm of possibility.
But here's what I know. No winning party, under any circumstances, thinks this way. Now, I remember not too long ago, the Democratic Party in the summer of 2022, right? They were scared out of their minds. There were members of the Democratic leadership that were worried about their seats. And what do you know? The polls swing back, and the Democrats actually had, besides New York, a pretty successful electoral outcome. This is by no means cooked. We shouldn't be thinking about after the election, because what we are running against is a Republican Party that even when their guy gets convicted, 34 felonies, they stand behind him right away. They don't even think about it.
But Democrats look at that and they say that is why the Republican Party has lost its way, because they are not demanding that this guy who's been found guilty on 34 counts, this guy who's got a whole host of other stuff that has gone wrong and inspiring an insurrection, et cetera, that they wouldn't demand that he step aside. They wouldn't actively try to get him out of the race. They have just fallen in line. And the criticism of Democrats for saying that for so long, and the idea that they would all just get along in line behind Biden, who they might have reservations about because of his age, some would argue feels Trumpian. I'm going to put you on hold for 1 second because I want to get Philippe into this conversation. I've heard Trumpian from a lot of people in the Democratic Party worried about what they're doing with Joe Biden. Not to say that the two men are the same. They're not. But Philippe, if you were advising President Biden, if you got to sit down with him and have his ear for 10 minutes, what would you tell him?
Honestly, I would tell him to let Congressman Rose take control of the press conference, because he just put forth, I think, the best argument to date in terms of the nervousness and the divide within the party. But the one thing I would add to it is the question you asked about what happens if Joe Biden continues to run and loses. Wouldn't that shatter the party? And I think the next question or the next point to make is people are not realizing that any shift away from Joe Biden has consequences too. And it's, you have to do a cost-benefit analysis of those risks. So if he doesn't run, there are people who want him to run that will be upset. If he doesn't run, then Vice President Harris should be the one, because she is basically his understudy and she is capable and really should be the nominee. If these cockamamie schemes are put into place where it bypasses her, then you have a whole other cost-benefit analysis of risk and carnage that are left behind. So it's not a binary choice of whether or not Joe Biden is the nominee, whether or not people are upset come after Election Day. In terms of what I would say to him, look, when I voted for him 4 years ago, there were no strings attached. If he thinks, which he does and which he's made clear, that he is capable of being president and capable of taking us forward, then he should. The thing that I would say is that if he is going to salvage this, because as the congressman said, the numbers went down, but numbers can come back up. But they don't always come back up naturally. You have to fight. What we've seen the last couple of weeks we've seen some fight, but we've also seen some lags. We saw the Morning Joe call. We saw the letter to Congress. Those were great. We saw his NATO speech. And what's interesting about that is no one paid attention to it. I think the fact that we're having a conversation now about a press conference a couple of hours from now, like it's a Super Bowl pregame, is a problem. And now they can't keep allowing there being a moving target of an off-ramp, because there are going to be three things that people are watching for. The first one is going to be what we all saw at 9 o'clock that night. How does he look? I can tell you right now, he's going to look the same. Two, it's going to be, the format. Is he going to take 100 questions and be there for 4 hours? No, he's not. So the media is going to be disappointed. The third is his actual answers. And his actual answers, it depends. We'll see whether or not he is still speaking a different language than the media. If he's approaching this as something that he had a bad night and nothing more than that, and when they say, well, will you take a test? And he says, I take a test every day, then we're back at square one. If they meet, if he meets them where they are, as annoying as that might be, then that's the point where you can start rebuilding. But basically, that is a tall order, what is set up this afternoon. If it was left to me, if I would say one thing to him, is that you want to do a series of small things throughout the week, every week. Mm-hmm. You don't want to set up a George Stephanopoulos interview. You don't want to set up a press conference. I'm not going to say you don't want to set up a Lester Holt interview because it's your sister network, but you know what I mean? You don't want to set up these big moments that anyone might have a bad outing.
Hey there, MSNBC fans. I'm Luke Russert, and be sure to join me, Rachel Maddow, Jen Psaki, Lawrence O'Donnell, Steve Kornacki, Joy Reid, and many more September 7th in Brooklyn, MSNBC Live Democracy 2024. Click on the link for ticket information. We will see you there.